Ukraine began employing F-16s on August 6, 2024, turning the battle around. Ukrainian strategic choices have expanded despite Western partners' restricted F-16 supply. Local superiority and attacking Russian positions, even on Russian territory, are possible. Interestingly, a bold move that no one could have predicted may overshadow this occurrence. Ukraine had entered Russia and was rapidly advancing. On August 8th, Ukraine launched a large-scale offensive with 1,000 soldiers and 2,000 border support troops, achieving greater success than expected. Ukraine captured 20 villages and advanced to Kursk, 14 kilometers from the border, and destroyed a gas transmission plant in Sudza. By August 13th, Ukraine controlled 28 settlements and 1,000 square kilometers of Russian territory, according to Commander Oleksandr Syrsky. Ukraine used small-scale tactics, attacking quickly and then retreating, causing Russian forces to lose control. Large groups then merged and held territory. Russia was forced to move troops from Donetsk to Kursk, but could not stop Ukraine from continuing to seize land in Belgorod. To date, about 6,000 Ukrainian soldiers have been operating on Russian soil, causing a large wave of evacuations, with more than 76,000 Russians leaving their homes. Despite international risks and the possibility of a nuclear response from Russia, Ukraine prevailed, weakening Russian forces and achieving a crucial turning point in the conflict. Putin humiliated, Russian military shows flaws. Putin is facing the biggest humiliation of his leadership. Ukraine's invasion of Kursk has exposed the serious weakness of the Russian military, which is considered superior with 1.32 million troops, 13,000 tanks, and 9,000 armored vehicles. However, Russia lacks air superiority, loses many modern aircraft such as the Su-30, Su-34, and Su-35, and is forced to use Soviet-era glide bombs instead of precision strikes. Ukraine has destroyed about a third of Russia's Black Sea fleet and inflicted huge losses. 400 soldiers, 8,500 tanks, 16,000 armored vehicles, and 16,800 artillery pieces. Russia even has to use T-55 tanks from the 1950s, which are vulnerable to modern weapons. The Kursk incursion also exposed Russia's lack of defense along its 997-kilometer border. Russian forces were too focused on Donetsk, leaving Ukraine open to advance into Kursk and Belgorod. The loss of many villages and towns showed that Russia's defenses and offenses were both weakened. The West did not protest the Ukrainian attacks, implying that they considered Putin too weak to respond. This further undermined his standing, as the red lines that Russia had warned about were seemingly crossed without significant consequences. Ukraine has crossed all of Russia's red lines, from receiving $121 billion in aid from Europe and $82 billion from the United States, to using Western weapons on Russian territory. The Kursk invasion erased the last red line, and Putin announced that he would not respond. This exposed Russia's weakness, as it could not resist a few thousand Ukrainian soldiers on its territory. The military defeat and the failure to carry out threats have damaged Putin's reputation, both at home and abroad. According to the Atlantic Council, the Kursk incident has broken the morale of his opponents, while a Chronicle poll in October 2023 found that only 12% of Russians still support the war, down sharply from 22% in February 2023. The prolonged conflict has caused 40% of Russians to want to withdraw from Ukraine, while the percentage opposing the withdrawal has also dropped from 47% to 33%. People fear that Ukraine could target their homes, increasing pressure on Putin. The U.S. has denied direct involvement in the attacks and has asked Ukraine to focus on defending its territory rather than escalating the conflict, but has failed to stop Ukraine. This shows that the West is no longer afraid of Russia. Putin's decline has not only shaken his domestic political position, but also left Russia facing chaos, demoralization, and a loss of strategic control, as Ukraine continues to put Russia on the defensive both militarily and politically. Ukraine's invasion of Kursk forced Russia to adjust its strategy. According to the National Interest, August 10th, this is a strategic move to expose Russia's weakness. Previously, in late July 2024, Russia launched its largest attack in 8 months in Donetsk, capturing many settlements and threatening to cut off Ukraine's important supply lines. Russia advanced deep into Donetsk, capturing Avdiivka 2024 and Bakhmut 5 2023, consolidating its offensive positions in eastern and southern Ukraine. However, Russia's concentration of forces in Donetsk left the northern defense line empty, creating conditions for Ukraine to advance into Kursk. This invasion forced Russia to disperse its forces, sending troops from Donetsk to deal with it, weakening the southern and eastern fronts. This opened up an opportunity for Ukraine to counterattack and regain territory in Donetsk. For the first time, Russia lost strategic control, facing the threat of Ukraine advancing deeper into its territory. Putin was put in a difficult position, having to defend multiple fronts in the context of depleted military resources and having to use Soviet-era equipment. The Kursk offensive completely changed the course of the war, forcing Russia to give up its initial advantage, while Ukraine took the initiative and weakened Russia's combat capabilities on all fronts. That's another way Ukraine's Kursk incursion affected everything. Ukraine has leverage for the first time since February 2022. Reuters reported in May 2024 that Kremlin sources expected Putin would negotiate a truce with Ukraine. Anonymous sources said Putin can fight as long as it takes to claim Ukraine, but he also wants a truce to stop the war. When asked about the source's claims in Belarus, Putin said peace talks may resume if they were based on reality. Putin was showing the world that he would have all the leverage in discussions. Russia had seized much of South Ukraine and was entering the Donbass. He was powerful. Putin could dictate since Ukraine has little leverage other than Western money. On August 6, that changed. Ukraine controls 28 Russian settlements and is advancing through Kursk and a gas transmission station. Starting negotiations now would give it something to hold above Russia. Ukrainian pressure puts Putin in a tough spot. Ukraine could ask Russia to leave some of its reinforced Donetsk sites in exchange for the Ukrainian military leaving Kursk. That leverage couldn't be better for Ukraine. The likelihood of Donald Trump's re-election as U.S. president adds uncertainty, as do his statements that he could finish the Ukraine war in a day. Nobody knows what that implies, and Ukraine is rightfully apprehensive about how a U.S. political structure shift could affect its support. The National Interest notes that European events increase uncertainty. European countries that support Ukraine will hold or have had elections in 2024. Leadership changes could cause Ukraine troubles by reassessing these countries' support. Additionally, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban holds the EU's rotating presidency. Orban has been close to Putin during the war, making him a Russian ally. Orban visited Moscow in 2024 for a peace mission and shook Putin's hand. This man halted the EU from sending $55 billion in help to Ukraine in December 2023, and he'll likely keep pushing for the EU to limit Ukraine's budget. Ukraine must worry about political shifts. Thus, conquering Kursk territory reduces the influence of European or U.S. political developments. That's horrible for Putin. He presumably relied on his friendly connection with Orban to limit EU backing and hoped for U.S. political turbulence to do the same. He didn't factor in Ukraine acquiring leverage outside of its Western friends, therefore he must accept that his negotiating position has shifted. He's still in charge if negotiations happen, but he'd likely have to give up land in Ukraine to reclaim Kursk, reversing Donetsk's steady progress. This concludes why the Kursk assault changed everything about the Ukraine war, humiliated Putin, and may never recover. Putin's strongman image is gone. We've discussed this before. A strongman in politics is an authoritarian leader who claims popular support but relies on military force to preserve power. With military assistance, they can claim to be the only ones who can solve a nation's problems. Putin's dilemma has evolved. He initially addressed Russia's economy, but since the late 2000s, he has focused on Russian sovereignty. Putin portrayed himself as the strongman during his 2008 invasion of Georgia. The 2014 Crimea annexation is similar. Putin was reclaiming Russian territory, according to his political doctrine. The Ukraine war was aimed to solidify Putin's rule over Russia for life. Ukraine has eroded Putin's carefully cultivated image. Europe and the U.S. have accepted Putin's message that his bark is worse than his bite by crossing red lines. Ukraine proved Putin's military threat isn't as strong as once assumed by defending against much larger Russian forces. Russian troops are becoming more like paper tigers, weaker in practice than on paper. Ukraine's invasion of Kursk is another weakness for the strongman. Putin has long portrayed himself as a defender of the Russian people, even while he pursued aggressive tactics abroad. That image is destroyed. Thousands of Russians are evacuated, and Ukraine is invading his country. Even if Russia forces Ukraine out of Kursk, Putin's political future remains uncertain. That skepticism is the authoritarian leader's nemesis and might steadily erode Russians' trust in him, not helping himself. On August 13th, The Guardian noted that Putin comfortably won Russia's presidential elections in March 2000 and has maintained power ever since. After 24 years, Russia faced a gun that reflected many of its problems when Putin seized control. In September 1999, Russia bombed Grozny, the Chechen capital. The war is now larger, and Russia is fighting on its territory for the first time since World War II. Putin's response is underwhelming. As this script is written, the Kursk invasion is nearing its 9th day. Ukraine isn't retreating, it's gaining ground, showing Russia's weak defenses. Putin can only promise impacted parties 1,000 rubles. The $109 is a pittance for those facing homelessness. A strong man has been brought to his knees by the Kursk invasion. Only time will tell if he can get back up or if Ukraine's invasion of Kursk truly stands as a pivotal moment in Putin's presidency. With that, we turn the questions over to you. What do you think? What do you think about the impact of Kursk? Will this change Putin's future and motivate Ukraine to launch new attacks? Will this success be enough to bring the Russian and Ukrainian presidents to the negotiating table? Every time there is new news about Russia and Ukraine, the question of how this war will end comes up. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to stay tuned for the next videos. See you soon.